I want to welcome to the program a very interesting woman, someone we've really wanted to have on the program for a long time. You've probably heard her quite a bit in the news over the last few months, but her career from beginning to end is incredible. She was a 7-time member of the U.S. Women's National Gymnastics Team, 1986 U.S. Women's All-Around National Champion. She's an author. She's a successful exec, all kinds of stuff. Jennifer Say, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much for having me. Happy to be here.
Well, you bet. I mean, in addition to all of the amazing things in your resume, I think what is most important is we've sort of reviewed a whole bunch of things getting ready for this interview and thinking about everything that you've been up to. Is there somebody who's always spoken out when it mattered most? It didn't matter what it was, your gymnast career, your executive career. You've always had this sort of driving ambition to sort of be you, tell the truth. And I'm wondering, look, let's start at the beginning. You get into gymnastics, nobody competes at the level that you were at unless you're just incredibly driven.
That is true. Yes. My dad tells these tales. He never saw anything like it in like a 5-year-old. I think I was probably a difficult child to parent. I feel for my parents. I have 4 children and, they're all kinds of different and all kinds of amazing, but, they all have a different and unique way of being challenging also. Right. And it's usually the flip side of all of their strengths, if that makes sense. And so you want to find a way to sort of encourage it, But yeah, I was a really driven kid. I think the one thing I would say is gymnastics is this sport that requires total obedience. I mean, the culture is just one of silence, obedience, do as I say, not as I do, don't talk back. And because it's a subjective sport, there's judging, as you know, it's not who crosses the finish line. And before you're even judged on the floor, you're picked for the team and there's subjectivity in that. And so that serves to reinforce this. Stay quiet, be good. We don't want to hear from you. Because if you're a troublemaker, you don't get picked.
Oh, it's interesting. It's also a sport. It's also a sport where you're competing at the highest levels at such a young age.
Yeah. So that is what allows for that kind of drilling in of obedience, I don't think it would work on grown-ups quite as well, because at a certain point, if you're a 25-year-old, while you may have been schooled in it, you're going to go, no, thank you. I'm not doing that anymore. And, we've seen that with Simone Biles, right? She's an adult now. And she said, I'm not putting my life in danger. A 12-year-old less equipped to kind of have that kind of wherewithal, I think especially, and this may be not, politically correct to say, not that you care, but I think little girls in particular are subject to this. And the coaching methodology is pretty cruel for both men's and women's gymnastics, but I think it's even worse in women's. And I think it's because they can get away with it. So I say all of this as background just to say I don't come by it naturally, or, I may come by it honestly because, speaking up is, I would say, a direct response to having been silenced for so long and seeing the harms that can come from that, not just to me, but to the other young girls and women in my community. You support a lie when you do that. And the lie in the case of gymnastics is that it's this like happy, fun, shiny, sparkly, oh, look at these little girls dancing around. And really, many, if not most, are on starvation diets, training on very serious injuries. And you know what? There's a way to do it that isn't that. I mean, the fact is, these children, as you indicate, are incredibly driven and motivated. The way that, the accepted coaching methodology, I believe, drives more kids from the sport, very talented kids, than we keep, because it's just the kids are just collateral damage. If you can't hack it, if you can't stand being bullied, starved, fat shamed, or training on a broken ankle, well, there's someone else in line right behind you. But think how many amazingly talented athletes you lose that way. And I know so many of them, and I would even put myself in that category because while I was a 7-time national team member and the 86 national champion, I walked away in disgrace in 1988, which was completely unnecessary if I had been treated with a touch more care. So I've had to work hard to overcome that obedience instilled in me.
It's so fascinating. It's just, I'm glad that you elaborated on that, because I sort of thought you've probably built to those moments, right? Because of your career and what you'd been a part of. Give me a little bit of the end of your career. 86 national champion. Obviously, you go into 88, high hopes. You decide ultimately to be done with gymnastics altogether. I'm guessing it's for all the reasons that you just articulated.
Yeah, decide would be a generous way to put it. I mean, I was just completely unraveling. I won the 1986 national championships on a broken ankle, a severely shattered ankle, which I didn't even learn until I was in my 40s. I had trained on this severely injured, purple, the size of a grapefruit ankle for over 2 years. That kind of pain wears on your psyche, as you might imagine. So the physical injuries really got to me, and that ankle injury was on the heels of a broken femur at the World Championships. So it was just injury upon injury, and I had an eating disorder and my brain was just like unraveling. I can't really explain it any better than that, but there were such high expectations of me, that I put on myself, but my coaches, and at that point, my parents, and, my parents are lovely, supportive, very sane people, but you get caught up in this world and you can't imagine, like, I gave up so much for my child. They can't walk away. She'll regret it. They think they're doing it for you, and they can't even see the harm that has been done to their child. And 2 years in a gymnast's life, it may sound short to us as grown-ups, but that was like 15% of my life already. Yeah. Like, it was unimaginable to continue training for 2 years when I was just unraveling. I mean, I was just deeply depressed and anxious, and it was bad.
Yeah.
It was bad. I wanted to like pull my car across the median and not have to go to practice. And so right before the Olympic trials in 1988, I said, I am done. I'll be honest, I wouldn't have made it. I was a mess. I was a wreck. I wouldn't have made the Olympics. I'm not here to pretend like I would have. I had lost all ability to do the sport. The twisties, which Simone Biles talked about at the Olympics, that's real. Things you've been doing since you were 8 years old, you don't understand. Up from down, like no ability to understand where your body is in space. It's really dangerous, as you might imagine, which is why I have so much empathy for her. I know not everybody does, but it's a very scary thing.
I imagine being 15 feet in the air and not knowing if you're going to land on your feet or your head is not a great thing.
Not a great thing. And a lot of times it does not go your way.
Right.
And I think the thing people forget about gymnastics is how dangerous it is. Right. So it's not like if you are unraveling and not doing well, that your time is just slow and you finish in fourth instead of first. You land on your head, you break your neck, you break your femur. We all knew young women who were paralyzed or died from the sport. And so you have to take those moments very seriously. Yeah. Self-protection has to kick in at some point. And that is why, I don't mean to harp on Simone, her teammates supported her, because they know that if she says she doesn't know up from down, that it's dangerous and she can't do it. And it's a matter of serious injury, life, death, not an Olympic medal. And so, that's kind of where I was. And in addition to a bunch of other stuff, and my body was broken and falling apart. So I did walk away. And the sad part of all of it is I walked away just completely ashamed. Like, I felt like I had not accomplished anything. I felt, and I had accomplished so much, I should have been proud. And it took me many years to feel proud of what I had been able to accomplish. Which is sad.
I mean, it is, but you also have this whole other facet of your life, right? I mean, you get into corporate America, you become a successful executive, you're right, chalked up. And that's kind of, it seemed to me like you revisiting that moment, right? And bringing out for the world to sort of understand what you had been through and how it sort of shaped your life and what the gymnastics community is all about, for good and bad and otherwise.
Yeah, I wrote Chalked Up. It came out in 2008. I actually wrote it in 2006. So, it was close to, what is that, 20 years after I left the sport. Because it haunted me. It hadn't left me. When you endure that kind of abuse, and there really is no other word for it, just humiliation and bullying every day. I mean, our weight was announced on the loudspeaker. You were shamed for gaining 1/4 pound. And, I don't coach fat gymnasts. You do, I could go on. You're a lazy piece of garbage when you are saying my ankle hurts, which is broken. So you keep going. And this is all the stuff outside of the rampant sexual abuse, which has been exposed because of Larry Nassar. So, that stuff sticks with you. It affects the way you view yourself. It affects your self-esteem. And mostly, what I took with me from gymnastics is deploying this strategy of like, I'll just keep my head down and work hard and not make trouble and do what people tell me, and I'll be good. Like, it worked, right? Like, I might have been miserable, but it worked. And so I kind of did that throughout my 20s and 30s. And I thought anything bad that happened, it was my fault. If something at work happened, it was my fault. If something happened in a relationship, it was always my fault, which is pretty typical. It's a typical orientation for a child that has suffered abuse.
Right.
A mother who hits her child, or a father, will say, I wouldn't have to hit you if you weren't so bad, right? And so think about how you internalize that. It's a very disorienting way to be in the world. And I spent a lot of time in my 30s coming to understand that through therapy, which I highly recommend. And then I wrote it down, which helped. It really helped me sort through it, because here I was, this grown woman with 2 kids and a successful job. I think I was a vice president of marketing at Levi's already. And I just was riddled with anxiety and anxiety dreams and, periodic depression. And I just kind of felt like garbage, all the time. I didn't think very highly of myself, and I should have. I was a nice person.
I mean, already what you had accomplished. I mean, anybody else would have just walked away and been like, well, just check out my medals, right? But you had struggled with this.
Yeah, writing it down really helped. It's why they tell you to do things like journaling, which I don't really do. My journaling was writing a book. And I just forced myself, as I wrote it, to be as honest as I could be about what happened, but also because I write stuff that makes me look bad. Like, that's fine. It's okay. You got to reveal the ugly stuff. The
truth, right? I mean, that was the guiding light on that.
That's right. And I have to say, it was 2008, so I was not wise in the way I am now to the ways of social media. I don't think any of us were in 2008. Right. And I also brought to writing the book, like, I thought this was sort of an open secret, that this is the way the training culture was.
Oh, you didn't know you were announcing news to the world?
I kind of didn't, which is really stupid of me and kind of naive. I knew the external world didn't know it, but I knew that we all knew it internally. So I didn't quite, I'm making myself sound really naive, but I didn't quite expect the backlash, which was pretty brutal, that I got, and the dragging on the internet. But it was good training for what would happen.
For what's to come.
Yeah. Just like, people chase you around the internet. They would call into radio shows to threaten legal action. And I was a liar and a grifter, you don't make money writing a book as an unknown memoirist. Believe me, this was a pretty shitty grift, if that's what that was my grift.
You got to go through a lot to get through that grift.
It's a hard slog. Yeah. So, I had to toughen up. I really had to kind of toughen up. I did not expect it. It was pretty tough, but it's interesting because the more they came at me, the more assertive I got about the message, because I was like, okay, this scares them. I hit a nerve, and in the beginning I would say, this is an indictment of the sport. This is my story. There's great coaches. And then after a year or two, I was like, no, this sport is toxic. This is an indictment of the sport. It all needs to change. And they still hated me, and that was fine. And then the Larry Nassar story broke.
Right.
And for those who don't know, he was the USA teen gymnastics doctor for 30 years, and he sexually assaulted over 500 young athletes, and he's now in jail for life. So when that broke, and it wasn't just about him, but this whole culture. And, I have to say, when the first few women came forward, well, they weren't the first known women that broke the story versus the ones that had repeatedly reported him over 30 years, they were dragged and called liars. They were called sluts. They were called anything to dismiss them. And I was like, oh, this is familiar to me.
And that's why you decided to get involved with Athlete A, right? Is because you felt like these people are going to they're going to try to dismiss them the same way that they had you.
Yes, and I already was I was involved in the case to a large extent already, because many of the young women who came forward had read my book and had contacted me personally.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
It just for courage, Yeah. And I, in fact, had spoken and worked somewhat with the civil attorney, or one of the main civil attorneys. Like when he had one client, he called me and he said, what is the deal with gymnastics? Because he had worked to defend victims of the Catholic Church. He didn't know anything about this. And I had also been a source for various journalists. And so, because, I was one of only two people at this point that had spoken out from a first-person account, not a journalist. It was me and Dominique Mosiano, the 1996 Olympic gold medalist. So, I was in the mix and in the ether. So the reason I decided to make Athlete A was I already knew the players. They trusted me, and I felt like I can tell this story better than anyone else. No, I've never made a film, but I'll find the right people to help me do it.
Well, you certainly did that. An incredibly gut-wrenching, powerful film that if you haven't seen it, you should definitely go see it. You got to be in the right frame of mind, though, because the story is a terrible story. And unfortunately, it's reality for a lot of the people that you were in the gym with for the last 30 some odd years.
Yeah, it's hard to watch. I tell people, have a cocktail or just prepare yourself. But I also think, despite the sort of cruelty and brutality, it ends with hope, because these women are making a difference. And not just the survivors that came forward, but the attorney that prosecuted him and the detective. I mean, that detective is amazing.
Yeah.
So it's also inspiring when people do the right thing and they find their courage. And I think the other piece that's really inspiring is that courage begets courage. So if one person stands up and is willing to fight the mob or the narrative, whatever it is, and speak the truth, chances are there's others that will join you. But somebody does have to go first, and it can really suck to go first, but you will find your people, and you won't stand alone forever.
Well, it's just absolutely true holistically, particularly in your life, because probably unbeknownst to any of you, as you're working on all of this stuff, you're an executive at Levi's. They want you to be the CEO of the joint. They love you. You'd been there how long? 20 some odd years?
Close to 23 years.
Yeah, 23 years. And like you said, you have 4 children. You, like all of us, are watching the world sort of in amusement. And I don't mean that and you're like interested, but I mean, what's happening to us during COVID is so unpredictable. And there were so many questions that all of us parents had at the time. You start voicing some of these frustrations over the internet. Right? And sort of unbeknownst to you, your employer takes exception with some of that.
All of it, yeah.
Yeah, all of it, I should say.
Interestingly, I mean, I was just sort of skimming kind of old social media yesterday. And I mean, I was speaking out from literally the beginning. I mean, I found stuff from early March. And it was specifically as it pertains to children and school closures. But I was somewhat vocal in the beginning. I did shift to almost exclusively children, but just about about lockdowns in general being incredibly destructive. You can't shut down global supply chains and think that isn't going to have long-term repercussions in the world, which is exactly what we're seeing. You can't shut down healthcare and deny people chemo and, AA meetings and think there aren't going to be long-term repercussions of that. And I was saying all of this, and I knew real, actual people that were suffering from this, But it didn't take a lot of imagination to that's what I didn't get from the beginning. It's like, it's not that hard to imagine that a child stuck at home in a 1 or 2 bedroom or 1 or 2 room apartment when his parents, a single mom maybe, is going to work at an hourly wage job and he's home alone and he's 6 or 7 doing online school. It's not hard to fathom that that's a disaster.
Right. What's so amazing about your story, though? So you're raising the same concerns that all of us are. You obviously have a huge platform at this point, and that you're an executive. They want you to be CEO of Levi's. You've been a national champion from a gymnast point of view, and you're involved in all these incredible projects. And so this platform's allowing you to ask the questions that all of us are. But at your corporate sort of folks are operating sort of in the same way that you found in the gymnast community, right? It's like, well, that's not the narrative, Jennifer.
Yeah. What are you doing? That's right. And I think it's of note, I didn't really have a following. I mean, I had 1,000 Twitter followers or something, and my friends on Facebook, even though all these things, and, I really didn't. I now have a medium-sized Twitter following. It's all from this COVID stuff in schools, really. That's really what it's from. So that was part of it, is I'm like, nobody's hearing me anyway. Who's listening to me? I'm a big nobody. It doesn't matter. And, at the time I was the chief marketing officer at Levi's, which is a big job. And I was very public facing, and I'd won lots of awards. But I just thought of myself as a regular person. I was a public school mom with 4 kids, all public school educated. Well, one was too young to be in school. I can't really describe it. I guess I would go back to what I was saying about the book. I was sort of naive. It was like, I thought it was an open secret. I didn't know it was a secret. Well, it was kind of the same for me with COVID. I was like, well, it's so obvious. I'm reading all the data. I'm reading medical studies. I'm reading stat news. Who reads stat news? And it's so clear if you read the numbers. I mean, I'm not a numerate. I'm not a math genius, but I understand numbers and data. It's so obvious to me that kids are not at risk. And then as early as April and May, the European schools started to open because they said the harms to children they're too great. So I felt a little like an insane person because it's here. It's all here. Why aren't you just looking at this? And so I don't know. I can't really describe it, but I just didn't think about what they thought of it. I can't. I mean, I got into arguments on Facebook with family very early.
Right.
So I moved off of that because I was like, I don't want to fight with my family. I'll go to Twitter where everything's civil, not really, but at least my family wasn't there. Right. And I did find other like-minded folks. And the thing that I do really like about Twitter, and everyone says it's a hellhole, and it kind of is, but you can talk directly with experts. Yeah. I could ask doctors, help me. And I did. I mean, I was obsessed. I would say, I just read your study. Can you answer my question on this? And they would do it. So that part of it to me was really helpful and interesting. And nobody was saying anything at work at first. It wasn't really until May, until somebody did. So I just kept thinking, okay, I guess they're not looking. They're not on Twitter. I'm fine.
So did you, when you were encountering the first of the workplace concerns, was that before or after you did the Laura Ingraham show? Because it seemed like once you did Fox, there was a different tone.
Shit really hit.
Yeah, right. Which has got to be an odd place. I just pause you before you say, got to be an odd place for you because one, you were not particularly political, but to the extent that you were certainly left of center.
I was pretty political. I mean, that's the other thing I would say is I posted about politics all the time before this, and no one cared.
But it was Democratic politics.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I posted probably inappropriate things at Trump or about Trump or other Republicans I didn't like or conservative policies. So no one had ever said you can't post about politics.
Right.
I mean,
you're like, well, I guess it's a free space, right? Because I've been doing that.
I'm a moron, I guess, because of course it's okay to say those things when you agree with us, but It's not okay to talk politically when you are saying something different than what we believe in. So the Laura Ingraham was a year in to my speaking up, but for a year I got you probably want to take it easy. Why are you talking about this? Please don't talk about this. Oh, you can't say this. Well, we can't tell you can't say this because I can't actually tell you that, but we really think you shouldn't say this. And then it shifted to like, we really like you for this job, but you can't really get it. I mean, this was a year.
I mean, that had to just drive you nuts. You're like, you mean to tell me my social media concerns about keeping kids outside of classrooms is what's going to keep me out of a CEO chair?
Well, and the CEO thing was, and you have to remember during this period, I got promoted.
Yeah, right. Well, because you were doing a great job, right? Which is the side piece of it.
Yeah. So I thought, okay, they don't like it, but how bad can it be? They're promoting me and the business is good and I'm doing my job. And for all the noise and, commotion about it, it's not having any impact on our business. And it's not, even people that are hating on me, it's like, it's not getting any traction or pickup. So who cares, But it continued to build. And, honestly, as I got more followers, of course, then things generate
It's a bigger threat. It's a bigger threat.
Yeah, it's a bigger threat. So, and I was on the local news a lot. But the thing, that enraged me, that just literally like set me on fire, was in the fall of 2020, all the private schools opened in San Francisco. Mm-hmm. So every single one of my peers telling me to be quiet had a child in in-person school.
Oof. Yeah, that'll get you. That will get you.
So it's not that I was angry with them, but I was like, everyone's got to see the hypocrisy here.
Yeah.
Everyone, again, I'm like, it's so clear. If I just say it the right way, everybody will get it. And I thought they would get it because they were sending their kids to school. So they didn't inherently believe school wasn't safe.
Right. This is it. Welcome to politics, Jennifer.
I understand, but that just, like I said, it's like in the gymnastics stuff, the more they came at me to call me a liar, the more I became more aggressive.
Yeah, so now you're like built for this moment, right? I mean, the whole run-up that we've talked about is you being told to just be quiet, put your head down, don't worry about it. You feel your entire life being sort of ripped out from underneath you until you sort of liberate yourself from that by telling the truth over and over, and now you're in this spot where it's like, well, that's just who I am now.
Yes. I mean, and that's not to say it's not really hard. I mean, it is really hard. I like people to like me. I mean, it's interesting. My husband, he doesn't really care if people don't like it. It's like nothing I've ever seen. It's a remarkable personality feature. Because he would just marvel. He would be like, why do you care if they're angry with you? Why do you care if these people on Twitter call you racist and call you all the other terrible things? I care. I mean, I can't completely eliminate that from my way of being, but I care a lot less than I used to because it's gotten so ludicrous. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have to have any grounding in any sense of reality, the names that they can call you, that are career-ending names. I mean, they ended mine.
And by the way, nobody was coming within the corporate structure to try to protect you from that.
Oh, God, no.
Right? I mean, if anything, it's like, well, she's getting what she deserves.
The employees were calling me these names.
They're chiming in.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'll tell you a story about that. So to answer your earlier question about Laura Ingraham, at this point, we're in the spring of 2021, and I had built a sort of grassroots connection to moms and dads across the country who were pushing for open schools. Lots in California and New York because they were closed the longest, but also those Pacific Northwest states stayed persistently closed as well. And there were a lot of us, and we called each other for support. And, it was incredibly helpful to me. And it was mostly women, not exclusively, from across the political spectrum. I mean, it was left, it was right, it was religious, it was everybody. It was just the concern for kids is what, united us. And we were all pushing to get in the media. to tell the story of parents and what was happening to our children. And no one would do it. And people had connections. We wrote the Times, we wrote CNN, we wrote nobody. When I say nobody that is considered center, that I would now not consider center, nobody would have us on. All they would have on are the most fear-mongering doctors and teachers unions, leaders saying mass death if we open schools, marching with coffins and this kind of thing. So Laura Ingraham called me. I moved my family to Denver in February of 21. I tweeted about it and it got picked up and went a little viral. I think Jake Tapper retweeted it. And then the Laura Ingraham show called and said, would you tell this story? And I panicked a little bit. I called my mom friends. I was like, what do we do? What do we do?
Right.
And they said, if you can handle yourself and not get sucked into, whatever message she's trying to further, which you may or may not agree with, but you get your message out there, then do it.
Yeah, that's
it's
a big
platform. It's a #1 cable news network in the country. Do it. So I did it. And that was like just the end, the beginning of the end. And that's when everything really accelerated at work. And that's when I was called publicly in, town hall meetings, racist and anti-gay and anti-trans.
Incredible.
And an embarrassment for the company.
At this point, you got to be like, well, wait a minute, hold on. These are a lot of people who I formally agreed politically on a whole bunch of stuff. And now I'm a racist and a bigot and it's got to be just opening up a whole new world to you in many ways.
We have these things, which is very popular in corporate America right now. They're called employee resource groups. And they're like,
oh, yeah.
Okay, you can criticize them all you want. Anyway, I was the executive sponsor of the Black Employee Resource Group. They'd asked me to lead it. 2 of my children are mixed race. We had talked about issues of, race and diversity and all of that. We had talked about that, me and many of the folks on my team. And so I was the leader of this group. That didn't matter. My children, that didn't matter. My votes, that didn't matter.
Which is so wild. If you think about all of this coming to fruition because you have some questions about the COVID protocol. And now all of a sudden, all of that, it's just, you must be a right-wing racist.
QAnon, psychopath. Yeah, you want to kill old people. You want to kill teachers. You want to kill the racists. I had to ask. I had to clarify.
You're like, how?
It's because if you are advocating for open schools and the majority of children in San Francisco, which is where I live, public schools are non-white, then you want Black children to die.
Oh, my Lord.
That's the rationale. It's so convoluted because, in fact, the children harmed are the disadvantaged children, the Black, the brown,
the Asian. Yes, of course. For the same reason, right? For the same reason their schools closed. Of course they're the ones that are disadvantaged.
Now all the headlines are those are the children that were harmed the most, which is all.
Yeah, I know.
But it went on like this for a very long time. Laura Ingraham, it was around March 21, and that just kicked up a whole shitstorm. But it was still another year. I was still there for a full year after
That's wild. Yeah. I remember you from your book, and I remember obviously hearing your name as a kid with your success in gymnastics, but I hadn't heard from you in a long time until I read your op-ed when you left Levi's. And it was an incredibly powerful read.
Thank you.
That was, look, just to summarize for our listeners, basically you went through your career, your life and career, and how it had led to these amazing opportunities in Levi and said, nice things about the company, but then started to explore sort of your conundrum here with questioning COVID policy and basically decided, I'm not going to take any of your money in severance or anything else. I'm going to tell my truth about why it is that I'm leaving here. And that to me was just an incredible act of courage, not just public courage, by the way. There's private and family considerations to do with that too, financial considerations and everything else, but you did it in a very big way.
I did do it in a big way. I think for me, as the 2 years progressed, my concerns were children. My concerns were about the safety and the development of children, but I became increasingly alarmed about the general illiberalism that I was experiencing, and the viewpoint discrimination, and the silencing of speech, and the silencing of open debate and dissent. Because the other point I would just make as it pertains to COVID, there were doctors, very well regarded, world famous, world renowned doctors and statisticians that said all of this early on, and yet they were demonized, vilified, and just shunted off to the side because we did not allow for any debate and dissent, which is essential to the scientific process, right? How can you search for truth and seek real truth without debate? So that became much more important to me to expose that than whatever sort of trifling, misgivings I have about Levi's. Because the fact is they're just caught up in this whole thing. Yeah. They're just another cog in this wheel. And we've read and heard so much about it on university campuses. We know about that. And there's so many professors that have spoken out or quit their jobs or lost their jobs. It hasn't been talked about quite as much in corporate culture, but all those kids that are graduating from university are going right to work in corporate America, and they expect to be heard and they demand to be heard. And the executive teams are afraid of them because they know how to use social media.
Right.
And to my mind,
unless they're conservative, in which fact they're not afraid of them at all. They'd like to just sort of put them back in their box and stick them back in their office. Right?
But more and more, as I'm sure you've observed, whether leaders of corporations are actually liberal and progressive or not, they want to appear that.
Yeah, totally. Yep.
They are polishing and burnishing this image as progressives. They don't want to be associated with the oil magnates and subprime mortgage lenders of the past. They are do-gooders.
Yeah.
And so I don't know what CEOs are registered to vote as. I don't know if they're Democrats. But at the end of the day, that is what the image that, all of tech is left-leaning.
Right.
I can't imagine what it would be like to be a Republican and work at Apple. That would be awful.
Got to be pretty quiet.
Republican is so crazy. But to respond to something you said before, it's so binary now, as I know that if you just veer one little step in any direction from these are the Democratic talking points, then you are a right-wing, alt-right psychopath.
Yeah.
And you are a racist, and you're hiding your clanhood in the closet. That's literally. And so once a lot of my friends, former Democrats, now independents, these are my new friends, it's a different thing. It's a different subject that kind of generated awareness for them, but then you start to question everything.
Well, that's what I was going to ask, is that you go through this entire experience, you leave Levi, how much of the assumptions that you make about nearly everything comes into question?
All.
Yeah, I got to imagine it does. You can't go through it that personally and not have it be.
Yeah, and there were things I already was questioning, honestly, but this one just blew my mind. I just could not understand how standing up for disadvantaged children who go to public schools was a right-wing position. It should be not a political position. If there's anything we can agree on, it should be children and the welfare and healthy development of children. So it just sort of blew my mind. So then, yes, of course, you start to question things that you were already questioning. I'm Jewish, not very religious, but I had already been questioning, I think, the growing anti-Semitism that I see coming from the left now, not the right. So that was something I'd been this is kind of weird. What's happening there?
Right.
And there were other areas, but I think the thing for me that's the most alarming is not each of these individuals' issues, whether it's, gender ideology or whether it's critical race theory and racial essentialism or whatever you want to call it, whatever the buzzword is. The real issue is that you can't talk about anything.
There you go.
Can't have the conversations. And I probably still fall further towards the left on a lot of issues than perhaps you and a lot of your listeners, not maybe as far as I used to be. But I also have a lot of friends who are hardcore pro-lifers. Yeah. And I understand the position.
Right.
I have a different one.
We used to be able to talk about all of this stuff, right? And it didn't matter if it was in a corporate scene or not. Of course, they've got to do your job, but but it didn't used to have to be a stigma on one set of views or values, right? That you couldn't talk about anything.
Well, you weren't evil. You weren't a Nazi.
Right.
Like, that's the crazy part.
Yeah.
Is like, if you thought kids should go to school, you were a fascist.
Oh, man.
It doesn't even make sense.
It doesn't. No, believe me. We could talk for 2 more hours. I wish I had 2 more hours with you, Jennifer. I hope we can do this again sometime, because there's so much more of your story, your courage, your ability to actually put sensical words to just a nonsensical situation that we really appreciate. And
well, I appreciate you having me. And I think once the absurdity of it is revealed, you have no choice but to just reject it. Like, otherwise it continues. Like, you have to call it out, and you have to take the risk. And I'm super lucky because I did very well for a very long time at Levi's, so I can kind of take this moment and figure out what's next, although I don't know what's next.
Well, listen, you've done it your whole life, and you've always figured out something that's next that is something better than the last.
But we all have to reject it, and we have to reject the nonsense, the name calling, the ad hominem attacks, the silencing of like, we have, you and I don't know what you think about everything, but we have to be able to talk about that.
Totally. That is absolutely true. I got 3 quick questions I got to get for you.
I think I know them, but go ahead.
This is all right. So this is, and I'm interested from a gymnast point of view on this one. If you could plan your last meal on Earth, what would it be?
Anything with French fries.
Okay.
Probably a meat item like a burger or a steak, but the fries are the main
Fries
course.
are essential. Okay, I get it. That's perfect. All right, second. And I don't know how to approach this one because you've had 2 very distinct portions of your life and career, corporate. Let's do the corporate thing. If you never got involved in corporate America whatsoever, and you had this huge gaping hole, blue sky that you could fill your time with, and you could choose anything, literally anything, what would it be?
I would make stuff. I would write books and make movies, which is what I'm doing now. I just have to figure out how to make a living at it. So.
Yeah. Well, you're telling important stories. That's the first point, right?
That's what I would do. Corporate, no corporate. Like, that would be my first choice.
I love it. Okay. All right. So the last question is a little esoteric. And our view is that people are motivated primarily by one of 2 things: the thrill of victory or the agony of defeat. It's not that anybody enjoys defeat or loves victory any less or more than somebody else. It's what motivates you. And the victory folks are generally sunny optimists, always charging up the hill towards the next thing. The agony of defeat people are, any success they've ever had in life, it lasts like 10 seconds, right? But any defeat they've ever had, they carry it with them, and they use that as motivation to try to get to the next level or maintain that it'll never happen to them again. On that spectrum, Jennifer Say, where do you find yourself?
Oh, I'm an agony of defeat person.
You seem like a very clear agony of defeat person.
Well, it's not that I like it.
No, I mean, that's the point of the question, right?
Like, it lights my competitor's ire.
Anytime somebody gets excited or more committed by the criticism that they're getting for something that they know is true, they're an agony of defeat person. That's the cheat code on that.
Do you know, I'll tell you a very short, sort of funny story. So that phrase, the thrill of victory, the agony of defeat, do you remember it used to
Jim
be
McKay. Yeah.
It was NBC.
Yeah, ABC.
ABC Sports on Saturdays, right? When I fell and broke my femur at the 1985 World Championships, they were going to use me as the agony of defeat, but it was too gross. Like, you could see too much. You could see the bone blade, and so they were going to switch because it used to be a skier, like on.
Yeah, I remember skiing off. Yeah,
they were going to add me in there. That's more than anyone can handle. So we're not going to do that.
This is an extra layer of Ruthless today. You got the origin of the story and perhaps the image we're glad we didn't see.
You can see it on YouTube. I don't recommend it.
Listen, Jennifer Say, thank you so much for joining us. Keep doing what you're doing. We're all watching and very proud of it.
Well, thank you for having me. It's nice to talk to you.
Thanks. Take care.